There I was, savoring my morning coffee and half watching the news, when raised voices drifted in from the driveway. I glanced out the window and saw Patricia Henderson, our self-proclaimed HOA dictator, standing beside my Honda Civic, clutching an enormous ring of keys that clinked like a jailer's bundle. She was flipping through them furiously, uttering curses under her breath. The moment she noticed me watching, she thrust the keys triumphantly in the air and bellowed that she possessed full legal authority to relocate my vehicle immediately. I stood frozen in disbelief as she jammed key after key into the door lock. None of them fit. With every failed attempt, her face flushed a deeper shade of crimson. Finally, when it became obvious the keys were useless, Patricia threw her arms up in theatrical exasperation and yanked out her phone. Right there in broad daylight, in full view of the entire cul-de-sac, she dialed 911 and reported an illegally parked vehicle posing an active threat to neighborhood safety. I snatched my own phone and hit record. Whatever was about to happen, the internet was going to love it. 6 months earlier, I had moved into the serene suburb of Maplewood Gardens, drawn by the manicured lawns and whisper-quiet streets. What the cheerful real estate agent conveniently omitted was Patricia Henderson, the HOA president who enforced every petty regulation as if it had been handed down on stone tablets. She lived 3 houses down in an immaculate colonial, with hedges trimmed sharp, enough to slice bread, and a welcome mat that ironically read, "Bless this mess," in flowing cursive. From the moment I unloaded my first moving box, Patricia made it clear she had her eye on me. Day 1 brought a passive-aggressive note about my mailbox being 1 shade off approved black. Next came a complaint that my welcome mat exceeded the maximum allowable width by 2 whole inches. When I painted my front door a rich navy blue, she materialized on my porch within hours, clipboard in hand, declaring the color a blatant violation of Section 12 of the Community Standards. Each time, I calmly informed her that I had read the actual covenants and was in full compliance. That only seemed to make her angrier. The parking war began 3 weeks ago when Patricia suddenly decided my car, legally parked in my own driveway, was protruding 3 inches beyond some invisible aesthetic boundary. She demanded immediate correction. When I measured it myself and proved her wrong, the campaign escalated from irritating to deranged. The notes under my wipers grew progressively more threatening. Polite reminders turned into final warnings, then threats of $500 fines, culminating in a laughably fake official citation printed on letterhead for the non-existent Maplewood Gardens Enforcement Division, complete with invented violation codes and a $75 penalty. Last Tuesday, I caught her on her hands and knees in my driveway, photographing my tires from every conceivable angle and measuring the distance to an imaginary line with a tape measure. When confronted, she announced she was gathering evidence for the next board meeting and bragged that she possessed a master key, granting her access to any vehicle in the neighborhood for enforcement purposes. Yesterday morning, she finally snapped. I was tying my tie when I spotted her marching up the driveway in a blinding yellow safety vest, clipboard swinging like a battle standard, that massive key ring jangling at her hip. She spent a solid 10 minutes trying every key on the door, the trunk, even the gas cap, growing more frantic with each failure. She muttered about defective Japanese engineering and ungrateful new residents. When she finally looked up and saw me filming from the kitchen window, her eyes narrowed to slits. Patricia stormed to my front door and pounded hard enough to rattle the hinges. I opened it to find her practically shaking with fury. "Spare key, now," she barked. "The HOA charter grants me emergency access to all vehicles." I smiled politely. "No such clause exists, Patricia." She informed me my car would be towed by sundown, and that I would be evicted from the neighborhood by the end of the month. My continued calmness appeared to enrage her further. I suggested gently that she reread the actual bylaws instead of inventing new ones. That's when she called 911. Loudly informing the dispatcher that a dangerous parking violation was blocking emergency access and that the homeowner was being hostile toward a neighborhood official. Less than 10 minutes later, 2 patrol cars rolled up. Officer Thompson, tall, with graying temples and a weary expression, approached Patricia first. Officer Davis came straight to me. I handed him my phone and let the video speak for itself. His eyebrows climbed higher with every failed key attempt Patricia had made on camera. Over by the Civic, Patricia was in full performance mode, gesturing wildly at my perfectly parked car while explaining the sacred intricacies of HOA enforcement authority to Officer Thompson. Something told me this wasn't going to end the way she had planned. She kept brandishing that massive key ring like a badge of office, insisting loudly that she had every right to enter my vehicle in the name of community safety. When Officer Thompson calmly asked to see any documentation supporting that claim, Patricia grew evasive, muttering that the relevant paperwork was back at her house. The two officers exchanged a subtle glance and stepped aside for a quick private conversation. While they spoke, I noticed curtains twitching and front doors opening up and down the street. Several neighbors had emerged to witness the unfolding drama. Mrs. Johnson from across the way approached Officer Davis and quietly explained that Patricia had been terrorizing residents for months. She offered to show him the threatening letters she'd received about her garden gnomes supposedly violating aesthetic guidelines. Mr. Williams, my next-door neighbor, joined in, recounting how Patricia had attempted to fine him $200 for washing his car on his own driveway. Even elderly Mrs. Foster made her way over with her walker, describing how Patricia had threatened to have her arrested for feeding stray cats. One by one, neighbors shared similar accounts of escalating harassment, fake fines, and over-the-top threats. The officers listened attentively, taking notes as a clear pattern of erratic behavior emerged. Officer Thompson returned to Patricia and asked directly about the keys. She doubled down, declaring them official HOA property and claiming absolute authority to use them for enforcement. When he requested her identification and any proof of that authority, she turned defensive and raised her voice, demanding to know why the police weren't immediately arresting me for the alleged parking violation. That's when Officer Davis revealed he had already verified my vehicle registration and confirmed the car was parked entirely within my property lines. He added that attempting to access someone else's vehicle without permission while falsely presenting oneself as having official authority could constitute serious criminal offenses. Patricia's face drained of color, then flushed bright red as the reality sank in. The officers pressed her to explain the origin of the keys and the exact scope of her authority. Her story unraveled almost immediately. She claimed the HOA board had provided the keys, but under further questioning admitted no such approval had ever occurred. She insisted she was simply protecting the neighborhood, yet couldn't cite specific bylaws or produce any supporting documents. Officer Thompson took her identification and began running her information. While they waited, more neighbors stepped forward with their own stories of intimidation and fabricated citations. The officers documented everything as the extent of Patricia's unauthorized campaign became undeniable. Patricia stood there seething, repeatedly asking why she was being treated like a criminal when I was the one supposedly breaking rules. The tension peaked when Officer Davis asked point-blank whether she had permission to try entering my vehicle. She erupted, shouting that permission was unnecessary because, as HOA president, she possessed inherent authority over all neighborhood property. Officer Thompson patiently explained that private property laws did not work that way. Patricia responded by accusing both officers of corruption and threatening to report them to their superiors. Officer Davis had heard enough. He informed Patricia that she was under arrest for criminal trespass, harassment, and filing a false police report. As he began reading her Miranda rights, her expressions cycled rapidly from fury to shock to outright panic. She protested loudly that this was all a terrible misunderstanding and that she had only been trying to uphold community standards. The officers remained professional but firm as they cuffed her and guided her toward the patrol car. Patricia continued shouting about impending lawsuits and warning that the neighborhood would descend into chaos without her vigilant oversight. Several neighbors watched from their driveways, some shaking their heads in stunned disbelief, others visibly relieved. Mrs. Johnson quietly remarked to Officer Davis that the street might finally enjoy some peace. Before departing, Officer Thompson asked if I wished to press additional charges for the prolonged harassment. I declined, believing the current charges would bring sufficient consequences. He provided me with a case number and explained that the false police report alone could carry fines up to $5,000 plus court costs, while the trespassing and harassment counts might result in further penalties, including possible jail time. That same afternoon, I received a call from David Park, the actual HOA board treasurer. He apologized profusely, stating the board had been completely unaware of Patricia's rogue activities and that she had never been granted any enforcement authority. He assured me an emergency meeting would be held to address the matter. The following day, word spread that Patricia had been unanimously removed as HOA president and permanently barred from any future board position. The most startling revelation came a week later at her court hearing. The prosecutor disclosed that the so-called master keys were actually professional locksmith tools inherited from Patricia's late husband. She had been wielding his old equipment to fabricate an aura of official power, despite having no training or legal justification for possessing or using it. When the judge sentenced her to 2 years of probation, extensive community service, and ordered her to pay $8,000 in restitution to affected neighbors, Patricia broke down in tears.